Sometimes the greatest revenge isn't destroying your enemies, it's becoming everything they never believed you could be. Sometimes it's watching them bow to the very person they dismissed as worthless. Hit like and subscribe if you've ever been. Underestimated by your own family, my name is Nix. I am 32 years old and I live in Portland, Oregon. But before I tell you how I became the landlord of my own childhood home, before I explain how I turned my family's cruelest nickname into my greatest weapon, I need you to understand what it feels like to be invisible in your own life. Picture this. You're 8 years old, standing in your parents' living room while they gush over your older sister's latest achievement. Your sister, let's call her Marina, has just won another academic award. She's brilliant, beautiful, and everything your parents ever dreamed. Of in a daughter, you're holding your own report card, straight A's across the board. But somehow your accomplishments feel like background noise to their symphony of praise for Marina. That's when you first hear it. The phrase that will follow you for the next 2 decades of your life. Well, at least we have our spare daughter. Your mother says with a laugh, not realizing or perhaps not caring that you're standing right there. Every family needs a backup plan. The spare daughter. That's what I became in the Peterson family hierarchy. Not Nick's, not their younger child, not even their disappointment. Just the spare, the insurance policy, the one who would always be there. To pick up the pieces if something happened to their precious Marina. I spent my childhood trying to prove I was more than just a spare part. I excelled in school, learned 3 languages, taught myself to code, and started my first business at 16. But no matter what I achieved, I remained in Marina's shadow. She was the sun, and I was just another planet orbiting around her brilliance. Marina went to Harvard on a full scholarship. I went to a local community college because my parents said they couldn't afford to send 2 daughters to expensive schools. Marina got a job at a prestigious consulting firm in Manhattan. I started working for a small tech startup in Portland. Marina married a surgeon and moved into a penthouse apartment. I lived in a studio apartment above a coffee shop and worked 18-hour days building my own software company. The difference was I was actually good at what I did, really good, while Marina was climbing the corporate ladder with her Ivy League connections and her husband's money. I was quietly building something from nothing. My software company, initially just me and a laptop, began to grow. We specialized in property management software, helping landlords and property managers streamline their operations. It wasn't glamorous, but it was profitable. More importantly, it was mine by the time I turned 28. My company had grown to 50 employees. By 30, we'd gone public. By 31, I was worth more on paper than my parents had ever imagined possible. But here's the thing about being the spare daughter: your family doesn't pay attention to your success until it affects them directly. Which brings me to last Christmas. I drove up to my parents' house in my usual beat-up Honda Civic. I'd never been one for flashy displays of wealth, preferring to keep my financial success private. The house looked exactly the same as it had when I was growing up, a modest 2-story colonial in a middle-class neighborhood, with the same faded blue shutters and the same creaky front porch. Marina was already there, of course, her Mercedes. Parked prominently in the driveway, she'd flown in from New York with her husband. DR, perfect, and their 2 young children. The whole family was gathered in the living room when I walked in, the same living room where I'd first heard the phrase. Spare daughter, all those years ago. Nix, my mother exclaimed, getting up to hug me. We weren't sure you'd make it. I know how busy you are with your little computer business. My little computer business. The company that had just been valued at $800 million was my little computer business. I wouldn't miss it, I said, settling into the same armchair I'd occupied as a child, the one position slightly outside the family circle, where the spare daughter belonged. The evening proceeded exactly as every family gathering had for the past decade. Marina talked about her latest promotion, her children's achievements, her husband's successful practice. My parents hung on every word, asking follow-up questions, offering encouragement and advice. When someone occasionally remembered to ask about my life, I'd give a brief update about work, and the conversation would quickly shift back to Marina. I was used to it. I made peace with my role in the family dynamic years ago, or so I thought. That night, as I was helping my mother clear the dinner dishes. I overheard a conversation that changed everything. I was in the kitchen, loading the dishwasher, when I heard voices from the living room. My father was talking to Marina and her husband in hushed tones, but their words carried clearly through the thin walls. "The thing is," my father was saying, "we're really struggling with the mortgage payments. The interest rates have gone up, and with my reduced hours at the clinic, we're barely making ends meet. How much do you need?" Marina asked, her voice filled with concern. "Well, we're about 3 months behind. If we can't catch up soon, we might lose the house." I froze. A dinner plate suspended halfway to the dishwasher. My parents were in financial trouble. They'd never mentioned anything to me. "Of course we'll help," Marina said immediately. "How much are we talking about?" "About 15,000 would get us current, but honestly, we could use help with the ongoing payments too. Maybe another 1,000. "A month?" There was a pause, and then Marina's husband spoke up. "That's a significant amount, but we can make it work. Family is family." "Thank you." My mother's voice came from the doorway to the kitchen. She must have been listening too. "We're so grateful." We didn't want to ask, but we didn't know where else to turn. "What about Nix?" Marina asked, and I held my breath. Shouldn't she contribute too? My father let out a laugh that made my blood run cold. "Nix? She's still playing around with that computer thing. She lives in a studio apartment, drives a car that's older than some of our grandchildren. She's doing fine for herself, but she's not exactly in a position to help with something like this. Poor Nix," my mother added, and I could hear the condescension dripping from her voice. "She tries so hard, but she's just not cut out for the kind of success Marina has achieved. It's good that she's found something she enjoys, even if it's not particularly lucrative." "Well, she's our spare daughter," Marina said, and they all laughed. "She'll always be there when we need her. Even if she can't contribute much financially." I stood there in the kitchen, holding that dinner plate, feeling like I'd been punched in the stomach, not because they called me the spare daughter again. I'd heard that countless times. But because they assumed I was struggling financially, because they didn't even consider asking me for help, because they saw me as so inconsequential that they didn't bother to keep me informed about their financial problems. I finished loading the dishwasher in silence, my mind racing. When I joined the family in the living room, they were already making plans. Marina and her husband would wire the money to catch up on the mortgage payments. They'd set up a monthly transfer to help with ongoing expenses. My parents were effusive in their gratitude, talking about how blessed they were to have such a successful daughter. I sat in my chair, the spare daughter chair, and watched my family make financial decisions that would affect all of us without once considering my input. Not because I couldn't help, but because they assumed I couldn't. That's when I decided it was time to stop being the spare daughter. The next morning, I drove home to Portland with a plan forming in my mind. I'd spent decades trying to prove my worth to my family, trying to earn their respect and recognition, but I'd been going about it all wrong. I've been trying to change their perception of me through my actions, when what I needed to do was change the fundamental power dynamic. I'd been successful in business because I understood leverage. I understood how to identify opportunities, how to solve problems, and how to create value. My family had a problem, and I was uniquely positioned to solve it not as their spare daughter, but as their equal, or better yet, as their superior. I spent the following week researching my parents' financial situation. It wasn't difficult. Public records showed their mortgage balance, property taxes, and recent payment history. What I found was worse than I'd overheard. They weren't just 3 months behind on their mortgage. They were facing foreclosure proceedings. The bank had already filed the initial paperwork. My parents' house, the house I'd grown up in, was worth about $400,000. They owed roughly $250,000 on the mortgage. If they lost the house to foreclosure, they'd lose their equity and their credit rating. They'd be forced to rent, probably in a neighborhood that was far less desirable than the one they called home for 30 years. But here's the thing about foreclosure proceedings: they take time. And during that time, other opportunities can arise. I called my real estate attorney on a Monday morning. By Friday, I had a cashier's check for $450,000 and a meeting scheduled with the bank that held my parents' mortgage. The bank was surprisingly cooperative. They were facing a foreclosure that would be expensive and time-consuming. With no guarantee they'd recover the full amount owed, I was offering to pay off the mortgage in full, plus penalties and fees, in exchange for a clean transfer of the deed. From their perspective, it was a win-win situation. From my parents' perspective, it was about to become much more complicated. I didn't tell them what I was planning. I didn't want to give them the opportunity to refuse my help or to minimize my contribution. I wanted them to understand, definitively and irrevocably, that I was not their spare daughter, I was their solution. The paperwork took 3 weeks to process. During that time, I watched my parents stress about their financial situation. I watched Marina wire them money to temporarily stave off the foreclosure. I watched my mother cry when she thought no one was looking, and my father spent hours on the phone with the bank, trying to negotiate a payment plan they couldn't afford. I could have ended their suffering with a phone call, but I needed them to understand the gravity of their situation. I needed them to feel the weight of the problem before I showed them the solution. On a Tuesday morning in February, I drove to my parents' house. I had a folder full of documents and a plan that would change everything. My mother answered the door, looking older than I remembered. The stress of the past few weeks had taken its toll. "Nix," she said, surprised to see me. "What are you doing here? Shouldn't you be at work?" "I need to talk to you and Dad," I said. "Is he here?" "He's in his office. But honey, if this is about money, we can't." "Mom," I interrupted gently. "Just get Dad, please." She called for him in a few minutes. Later, we were all sitting in the living room. The same living room where I'd first been labeled the spare daughter. The same room where they discussed their financial problems without considering my input. I opened my folder and pulled out the first document. "I know about the foreclosure," I said without preamble. "I know you're 3 months behind on the mortgage, and I know the bank has filed paperwork to take the house." My parents exchanged glances. My father cleared his throat. "Nix, we didn't want to worry you. Marina is helping us work through the situation." "Marina is helping you delay the inevitable," I corrected. "The amount you're behind, plus the ongoing payments you can't afford, means you'll be back in the same situation in 6 months." My mother's eyes filled with tears. "We're doing the best we can. We never thought we'd be in this position." "I know," I said, and I meant it, which is why I solved the problem for you. I pulled out the second document, a copy of the deed to their house. Their names had been crossed out. Mine had been written in. "I bought your house," I said simply. "I paid off the mortgage in full. The foreclosure proceedings have been dismissed. You're no longer in debt to the bank." The silence that followed was deafening. My parents stared at the document, then at me, then back at the document. "I don't understand," my father said finally. "You bought our house? How could you possibly afford?" "That's not the important question," I interrupted. "The important question is what happens next." I pulled out the third document, a rental agreement. "You can continue living here," I said. "The rental rate is $1,500 a month, which is below market value for a house this size in this neighborhood. The lease term is month to month, so you have flexibility. And as long as you pay your rent on time, you can stay as long as you want." My mother was crying now, but I couldn't tell if it was from relief or shock. "Nix," my father said slowly, "where did you get the money for this?" "From my little computer business," I said, echoing my mother's words from Christmas. "The business that went public 2 years ago. The business that's worth more than $800 million. The business that made me personally worth more than $200 million. The silence stretched between us like a chasm. "You're rich?" My mother whispered. "I'm successful," I corrected. "I've been successful for years. I tried to tell you, but you never asked. You assumed I was struggling because I don't drive a fancy car or live in a penthouse. You assumed I couldn't help because I'm not married to a surgeon or working for a consulting firm." My father was staring at me like he'd never seen me before. "Why didn't you tell us?" He asked. "I tried," I said. "But every time I mentioned my business, you called it my little computer thing. Every time I talked about my work, you changed the subject to Marina's achievements. You didn't want to hear about my success because it didn't fit the narrative you'd created about me. I stood up, smoothing down my jeans. I need you to understand something. I said, I didn't do this to hurt you. I did this to save you, but I also did it to save myself. I'm not your spare daughter anymore. I'm your landlord. And that changes everything. My mother looked up at me, mascara streaking down her cheeks. What do you mean? I mean that for the first time in my life, you need me more than I need you. I mean that I'm not the backup plan anymore. I'm the primary solution. I mean that the spare daughter just became the most important person in your financial life. I walked to the door, then turned back. The first month's rent is due on the 15th, I said. After that, it's due on the 1st of every month. If you're late, there's a $50 penalty. If you're more than 10 days late, we'll need to discuss other arrangements. NYX, my father called after me. Wait, we need to talk about this. We need to understand. You need to understand that I'm not negotiating. I said, I'm not asking for your approval or your gratitude. I'm telling you how things are going to be. You can accept it, or you can find somewhere else to live. I left them sitting in their living room, my living room, staring at the rental agreement. The drive home was surreal. I just bought my childhood home and turned my parents into my tenants. I'd fundamentally shifted the power dynamic of my family in a way that could never be undone. I should have felt guilty or angry or something dramatic. Instead, I felt free. That evening my phone rang. It was Marina. Nix, what the hell did you do? She demanded without preamble. I solved Mom and Dad's problem, I said calmly. You're welcome. You bought their house. You made them tenants? How could you be so cruel? Cruel? I laughed, Marina. They were going to lose the house. They were going to lose their equity, their credit rating, and their home. I saved them from that. I gave them a below-market rental rate and flexible lease terms. How is that cruel? You humiliated them, she said. You made them feel like failures. I made them feel like what they made me feel like for 30 years. I said, powerless, dependent, grateful for scraps of attention and respect. That's not the same thing. It's exactly the same thing, I interrupted. The only difference is that I actually have the power to help them, and I'm using it responsibly. You were throwing money at a problem without solving it. I solved it by taking advantage of their desperation. By using my resources to create a sustainable solution, I corrected. Marina, I could have let them lose the house. I could have bought it after the foreclosure for half the price. Instead, I paid full market value, eliminated their debt, and gave them a rental arrangement that allows them to stay in their home. If that's cruel, then I'm not sure what kindness looks like. There was a long pause. How long have you been rich? She asked finally. How long have you been calling me the spare daughter? I replied, another pause. You're going to make them pay rent to live in their own home? It's not their home anymore, I said. It's my home. They're paying rent to live in my home. And yes, I'm going to make them pay rent because that's how landlord-tenant relationships work. It's fair, it's legal, and it's a lot better than being homeless. NYX, this is insane. You can't just... I already did, I said. And Marina? Next time you want to call me the spare daughter, remember that I'm the one who kept your parents from losing their home. Remember that I'm the one who solved a problem you couldn't solve. Remember that the spare daughter turned out to be the most essential person in this family. I hung up the phone. Over the next few days, I received calls from various family members. My uncle, who'd heard about the situation from my mother, my cousin, who'd gotten the story secondhand from Marina. A few family friends who'd been filled in on the drama. The reactions were mixed. Some people thought I was being vindictive and cruel. Others thought I was being practical and generous. A few people seemed to understand what I was really doing, establishing boundaries and demanding respect. But the most interesting reaction came from my parents themselves. On the 15th of the month, I received a notification on my phone. My parents had paid their rent on time in full. 2 days later, my mother called. NYX, she said, I won. To apologize, I was sitting in my office, reviewing quarterly reports, when the call came in. I'd been expecting it, but I was still surprised by the emotion in her voice. For what? I asked. For not seeing you, she said. For not recognizing what you've achieved. For treating you like you were less important than Marina. For calling you the spare daughter. I set down my pen and leaned back in my chair. Why are you apologizing now? I asked. Because I finally understand, she said. I understand that you didn't buy our house to hurt us. You bought it to save us. And you did it without asking for anything in return except to be treated with respect. I didn't do it without asking for anything in return, I corrected. I did it in exchange for recognition. I did it to force you to see me as I actually am, not as you've always assumed I was. And how do you want us to see you? She asked. As an equal, I said. As someone whose opinion matters. As someone who's capable of solving problems and making decisions. As someone who deserves to be consulted when family financial decisions are being made. You're right, she said. You've always been right. We just never paid attention. Because I was the spare daughter, I said. Because spares don't matter until you need them. You were never spare, she said. And I could hear tears in her voice. You were different from Marina, but you were never spare. We just didn't know how to appreciate what made you special. It was a nice sentiment, but it was 30 years too late. Mom, I said gently, I love you, but I need you to understand that our relationship is different now. I'm not the little girl who's desperate for your approval. I'm a successful adult who's made her own way in the world. I'm also your landlord. Those are the facts, and we all need to adjust to them. I know, she said, and I'm proud of you. I should have said that years ago, but I'm saying it now. I'm proud of what you've built, and I'm grateful for what you've done for us. Thank you, I said. That means a lot. Will you come to dinner on Sunday? She asked. I want to hear about your business. I want to understand what you do and how you built it. I want to know my daughter, I smiled. The first genuine smile I'd had in weeks. I'd like that, I said. Sunday dinner was different from any family gathering I'd ever attended. For the first time in my life, I was the center of attention. My parents asked detailed questions about my business, my employees, my plans for the future. They wanted to know about my investments, my charitable. Getting my personal life, Marina was there too with her husband and children. She was quieter than usual, but not hostile. At one point, she pulled me aside. I owe you an apology, she said. I've been thinking about what you said about being the spare daughter. I never realized how that must have felt. It felt like being invisible, I said. Like being loved conditionally based on what I could provide rather than who I was. That's not how Mom and Dad meant it, she said. Maybe not, I said. But that's how it felt. And feelings matter, even when they're not intended. She nodded, looking uncomfortable. I want you to know that I never thought of you as spare, she said. I thought of you as my little sister. I thought of you as family. But you never defended me. I said, when they called me the spare daughter, you laughed along. When they dismissed my achievements, you stayed silent. When they assumed I couldn't help with their financial problems, you didn't correct them. You're right, she said. I should have done better. I should have been a better sister. You can still be a better sister, I said. It's not too late. How? By treating me like an equal, by recognizing that I'm successful and capable, by including me in family decisions instead of assuming I have nothing to contribute. I can do that, she said. I want to do that. Good, I said, because I'm not going anywhere. I'm not the spare daughter anymore, but I'm still your sister. And I'm still part of this family, even if the dynamics have changed. Over the following months, things slowly shifted. My parents began including me in family discussions. They asked for my advice on financial decisions, career choices, and even relationship issues. They introduced me to their friends as their daughter who owned a successful tech company, not as the spare daughter who worked with computers. Marina and I developed a different kind of relationship based on mutual respect rather than her assumed superiority. She even referred a few clients to my company. And I helped her navigate some complicated financial planning decisions. But the most significant change was in how I saw myself. For the first time in my life, I wasn't defined by my relationship to my family. I wasn't the spare daughter, the backup plan, or the disappointment. I was Nix Peterson, successful entrepreneur, property owner, and equal member of my family. The rental arrangement worked well for everyone. My parents paid their rent on time every month, and the first used the income to make improvements to the property. I had the roof replaced, updated the electrical system, and renovated the kitchen. The house was in better condition than it had been in years. More importantly, my parents were no longer stressed about losing their home. They had stability, predictability, and a landlord who cared about their well-being. They could focus on their health, their relationships, and their retirement without the constant worry about mortgage payments. 6 months after I bought the house, my father asked if he could take me to lunch. "I want to understand something," he said as we sat in a quiet restaurant downtown. "Why did you do it?" "Really? Which part?" I asked. "All of it. Buying the house, making us tenants, changing everything. You could have just given us the money to catch up on the mortgage. You could have helped us refinance. You could have done a dozen different things. Why did you choose to become our landlord?" I considered the question carefully. It was something I'd been thinking about for months. "Because giving you money wouldn't have changed anything," I said finally. "It would have solved the immediate problem, but it wouldn't have addressed the underlying issue. You would have been grateful, but you still would have seen me as the spare daughter who got lucky. You still would have assumed I couldn't contribute to important family decisions. But making us your tenants made it impossible for you to ignore my capabilities." I said, "It forced you to acknowledge that I'm not just successful, but successful enough to solve problems you couldn't solve. It made you see me as someone with real power, not just someone who got lucky with a small business." He nodded slowly. "You wanted respect," he said. "I wanted equality," I corrected. "I wanted to be seen as an adult, as a peer, as someone whose opinion matters. I wanted to stop being the spare daughter and start being just your daughter. And now? Now I am," I said. "It took becoming your landlord to make it happen, but it worked. You see me differently now. You treat me differently. You include me in family decisions. You ask for my advice. You're proud of what I've achieved." "We were always proud of you," he said. "No," I said gently. "You were always hopeful that I'd eventually achieve something worth being proud of. There's a difference." He was quiet for a long moment. "I'm sorry," he said finally. "I'm sorry we made you feel like you had to prove yourself. I'm sorry we called you the spare daughter. I'm sorry we didn't see how extraordinary you were." "I'm not extraordinary," I said. "I'm just good at what I do, and I'm good at it because I had to be, because I was the spare daughter. I learned to be self-reliant because I was dismissed. I learned to prove myself through actions rather than words. Because I was underestimated, I learned to exceed expectations." "So, in a way, we helped make you successful?" he asked with a wry smile. "In a way," I agreed. "But I wouldn't recommend your parenting strategy to anyone else." He laughed, and I realized it was the first time we'd shared a genuine laugh together. "And here's what happens now?" he asked. "Now we move forward," I said. "You're my tenants and I'm your landlord, but you're also my parents and I'm your daughter. We figure out how to balance those relationships. And if we can't, then I'll find you different tenants," I said with a smile. But I don't think it will come to that. A year later, I was featured on the cover of a major business magazine. The article was about young entrepreneurs who were changing their industries, and my company was highlighted as a leader in property management software. The headline read, "The Spare Daughter Who Built an Empire." I pitched the headline myself. My parents framed the magazine cover and hung it in their living room, my living room, right next to Marina's Harvard diploma and her wedding photo. For the first time in my life, I had equal wall space. At the family Christmas gathering that year, things were different. Marina was still the successful older sister, but I was no longer the spare daughter. I was the successful younger sister. The landlord, the problem solver, the one who'd saved the family home. When my young nephew asked what I did for work, my father jumped in before I could answer. Aunt Nix owns a big computer company, he said. Proudly, she's the one who makes sure we get to keep living in our house. Are you rich? My nephew asked with the bluntness that only children can manage. I'm successful, I said, echoing what I told my parents a year earlier. And success isn't just about money. It's about solving problems, helping people, and building something that matters. Did you always want to be successful? He asked. I thought about it for a moment. I always wanted to matter, I said. I always wanted to be important to the people I love. I always wanted to be seen as more than just a backup plan. What's a backup plan? He asked. Marina spoke up. Before I could answer, it's something you don't need, she said, looking at me with a smile. Aunt Nix was never a backup plan. She was always essential. We just didn't realize it until she showed us. Later that evening, as I was getting ready to leave, my mother pulled me aside. I have something for you, she said, handing me a small wrapped package. Inside was a key. Not just any key, but the original key to the house, the one I'd carried as a child, the one that had been taken away when I moved out, the one that represented belonging and family and home. I know you have keys to the house as the landlord, she said, but I wanted you to have this one back. As our daughter, as someone who belongs here. I looked at the key, feeling the weight of 30 years of complicated family dynamics. Thank you, I said. But I think I'll keep using the landlord keys. They represent who I am now, not who I used to be. And who are you now? She asked. I thought about it for a moment, considering all the ways I changed over the past year. I'm someone who solves problems, I said. I'm someone who builds things that last. I'm someone who takes care of the people I love, even when they don't realize they need taken care of. And you're not the spare daughter anymore? I was never the spare daughter, I said. I was always essential. You just couldn't see it until I made it impossible to ignore. She smiled and hugged me. I see it now, she said. I see you now. As I drove home that night, I reflected on the journey that had brought me here. A year ago, I'd been the invisible daughter, the backup plan, the one who didn't matter. Today, I was the landlord of my childhood home, the successful entrepreneur, the problem solver, the one who'd saved the family. But more than that, I was finally free from the need to prove myself to anyone. I'd spent 30 years trying to earn my family's respect and recognition. In the end, I'd gotten it not by begging for it, but by demonstrating that I didn't need it. I'd stopped being the spare daughter by showing them that I was never spare to begin with. I was essential, I was valuable, I was enough, and now, finally, they could see it too. My phone buzzed with a text message from Marina. Thank you for saving our childhood home. Thank you for being the sister we needed. Even when we didn't deserve it, thank you for never giving up on us, even when we gave up on you. I smiled and typed back. That's what family does. We take care of each other, even when we call you the spare daughter. She replied, especially then, I wrote back. Someone has to be the grown-up in this family. 6 months later, I launched a new initiative through my company. We partnered with local housing organizations to help families avoid foreclosure by providing bridge loans and financial counseling. We called it the Second Chance Program, and it was inspired by my own family's experience. In the first year, we helped over 300 families stay in their homes. Each case was different, but the underlying principle was the same. Everyone deserves stability, dignity, and the opportunity to build a better future. The program was featured in national media, and I was invited to speak at conferences about innovative approaches to housing security. In one interview, the reporter asked about my motivation for starting the program. I learned that sometimes the people who need help the most are the ones who are least likely to ask for it. I said, I learned that financial problems can destroy families, but they can also bring families together if they're handled with dignity and respect. Any personal experience with that? The reporter asked. I smiled. Let's just say I understand what it's like to be underestimated. I said, and I understand what it's like to surprise people with your capabilities. The story ran with the headline, "From Spare Daughter to Housing? Hero. How one entrepreneur is revolutionizing family financial security." My parents called me after they read the article. "We're proud of you," my father said. "Not just for what you've achieved, but for who you've become. I've always been this person." I said, "You just needed to see it. We see it now," my mother said, "and we're grateful. Not just for what you did for us, but for what you're doing for other families. Everyone deserves a second chance," I said. "Everyone deserves to be seen as more than their worst moment or their biggest mistake." "Is that what you gave us?" my father asked. "A second chance?" "I gave us all a second chance," I said. "A chance to be a real family, based on respect and equality rather than assumptions and labels." "And are we?" my mother asked. "Are we a real family now?" I considered the question. Over the past 18 months, so much had changed. My parents no longer saw me as the spare daughter, but as an equal member of the family. Marina and I had developed a genuine friendship based on mutual respect. I'd gone from being invisible to being essential, from being overlooked to being the one everyone turned to for advice. "We're getting there," I said. "We're learning how to be family without the old labels and assumptions. What would make us a real family?" My father asked. "Time," I said. "Trust. Continued effort from all of us to see each other as we really are, not as we've always assumed each other to be. And forgiveness?" My mother asked quietly. "Forgiveness is earned," I said, "through changed behavior, through respect, through treating each other with dignity. You're earning it every day." 2 years after I bought my parents' house, Marina called me with unexpected news. "I'm getting divorced," she said without preamble. I was in my office reviewing contracts when the call came in. Marina's voice was steady, but I could hear the underlying exhaustion. "I'm sorry," I said. "Are you okay?" "I'm better than okay," she said. "I'm free. It turns out that being married to a successful surgeon doesn't guarantee happiness." "What happened?" "Nothing dramatic," she said. "Just two people who realized they wanted different things from life. He wanted a trophy wife who would host dinner parties and look good at medical conferences. I wanted a partner who would support my career and treat me as an equal." "Sounds familiar," I said. "Yeah," she said with a laugh. "I guess being underestimated runs in the family." "Are you going to be okay financially?" I asked. "I'll be fine," she said. "I've got a good job, and the settlement will help, but I was thinking about moving back to Portland. I want to be closer to family. I want my kids to know their grandparents and their aunt. Their aunt would like that," I said. "Would you help me find a place?" She asked. "I know real estate isn't your specialty, but you understand property investment better than anyone I know." "Of course," I said. "But Marina, I need to ask you something." "What?" "Are you moving back because you need help or because you want to be part of the family?" There was a long pause. "Both," she said finally. "I need the support system, but I also want to be part of something real. I want my kids to grow up in a family where people take care of each other, where success is measured by more than just money and status." "Good," I said, "because the family you're moving back to is different from the one you left. We're all different. Better different?" "Honest different," I said. "We see each other clearly now. We don't pretend anymore." Marina moved back to Portland 3 months later. I helped her find a beautiful townhouse in a family-friendly neighborhood, and I connected her with a local law firm that needed someone with her expertise. She took a significant pay cut from her New York salary, but she was happier than I'd seen her in years. Her kids, my nephew and niece, were 7 and 9 years old. They were curious, intelligent, and refreshingly direct. They asked me about my business, my house, my life. They wanted to know why I didn't have kids, why I lived alone, why I worked so much. "Aunt Nix is building something important," Marina explained to them one day as we all sat in my parents' living room. "She's creating jobs for people and helping families stay in their homes, like she helped Grandma and Grandpa." My nephew asked. "Exactly like that," Marina said. "Aunt Nix is." Very good at solving problems. Are you rich? My niece asked with characteristic 9-year-old bluntness. I'm successful, I said, giving my standard answer. What's the difference? She asked. I thought about it for a moment. Rich is about having money, I said. Successful is about using your abilities to help people and build things that matter. Are you happy? She asked. It was a simple question, but it stopped me cold. Was I happy? I was successful, respected, financially secure. I'd proven my worth to my family and established myself as an equal. I'd built a company that employed hundreds of people and helped thousands of families. I owned property, had investments, and lived comfortably. But was I happy? I'm satisfied, I said carefully. I'm proud of what I've built. That's not the same thing, my niece said with devastating clarity. She was right. Satisfaction and pride weren't the same as happiness. I'd been so focused on proving myself, on changing my family's perception of me, on building my business empire, that I'd never stopped to ask whether I was actually happy. That night, I sat in my studio apartment, the same studio apartment I'd lived in for years, despite being able to afford something much nicer, and really looked at my life. I had a successful business, a complicated but improving relationship with my family, and more money than I could spend in a lifetime. I also had no close friends, no romantic relationships, and no hobbies outside of work. I'd spent so many years focused on proving I wasn't the spared daughter that I'd forgotten to build a life worth living. The next morning, I called my assistant and cleared my schedule for the afternoon. Then I drove to a neighborhood I never explored and walked into a pottery studio that offered beginner classes. I want to learn to make something with my hands, I told the instructor. Any particular reason? She asked. I want to create something that's not about solving problems or making money. I said, I want to make something just because I enjoy making it. That's a good reason, she said. When? Do you want to start? Now, I said. I spent the next 3 hours learning to center clay on a wheel. My hands covered in mud, my expensive blouse ruined, my mind completely focused on the present moment. It was the most relaxed I'd been in years. I signed up for weekly classes over the following months. I made other changes. I joined a book club. I started taking cooking classes. I adopted a dog from the local animal shelter, a scrappy little terrier mix who'd been returned by 3 previous families because he was too independent. Sounds like my kind of dog, I told the shelter volunteer. I named him back up as a private joke about second chances and spare parts that turn out to be essential. I also started dating, something I barely had time for in the past decade. I met a woman named Jules through the book club. High school teacher who was intelligent, funny, and completely unimpressed by my business success. So you're rich, she said on our second date. What else is interesting about you? I'm learning pottery, I said. Now that's interesting, she said. Show me something you've made. I brought her a slightly lopsided bowl I'd made in my 4th class. It's terrible, I said. It's perfect, she said. It's imperfect in a way that makes it beautiful. Kind of like me, I said. Exactly like you, she said, and kissed me. 6 months later, Jules met my family at Sunday dinner. My parents were nervous. They'd never met anyone I was dating, but Jules charmed them immediately. She asked thoughtful questions about their lives, complimented my mother's cooking, and engaged my father in a lengthy discussion about his woodworking hobby. She's lovely, my mother said as we cleared the dishes. Are you happy? I'm getting there, I said. I'm learning what happiness looks like for me. And what does it look like? Balance, I said. Success in relationships, achievement and joy, proving myself and accepting myself. You don't have to prove yourself anymore, she said. You've already proven everything you need to prove. I know, I said. That's what makes it possible to focus on other things. That summer, I made a decision that surprised everyone, including myself. I decided to sell my company. Not because I was failing, but because I was succeeding too well. The business had grown beyond my ability to maintain the personal connection and hands-on leadership that had made it special. I was spending more time managing managers than actually solving problems or creating value. I found a buyer who shared my values and would maintain the company culture I'd worked so hard to build. The sale price was more money than I could have imagined when I started the business in my studio apartment, but more importantly, it gave me the freedom to choose what came next. I kept the real estate portfolio, including my parents' house and several other properties I'd acquired over the years. I maintained my involvement in the Second Chance program, which had become its own nonprofit organization, and I started a new venture consulting firm that helped other entrepreneurs build sustainable, values-driven businesses. The work was more flexible, more creative, and more personally fulfilling than running a large corporation. I could choose my clients, set my own schedule, and focus on the aspects of business that I enjoyed most. I also moved out of my studio apartment. Jules and I found a house together, a charming craftsman bungalow with a garden and a workshop where I could practice pottery. It was the first time I'd lived with someone since college, and the first time I'd ever chosen a home based on how it made me feel rather than how practical it was. "This is very grown-up of you," Marina said when she saw the house. "What do you mean?" I asked. "I mean, you're finally living like someone who has money instead of someone who's afraid of losing it." She was right. For years, I'd lived like I was still the spare daughter, still trying to prove I belonged, still afraid that my success could disappear at any moment. Moving in with Jules, buying a house that was beautiful rather than just functional, learning pottery just for the joy of it, these were the actions of someone who was secure in her place in the world. "I'm not afraid anymore," I said. "I'm not afraid of failing or of succeeding or of being seen as I really am." "And how do you see yourself?" she asked. "As someone who's enough," I said, "just as I am." 3 years after I bought my parents' house, we had a family meeting. Everyone was there, my parents. Marina and her kids, Jules and me, we gathered in the living room where I'd first heard the phrase spare daughter, where I'd later revealed that I'd bought the house, where we'd slowly learned to be a real family. "I want to talk about the house," I said. My parents looked nervous. They'd been model tenants, paying rent on time, taking care of the property, and never causing any problems. But they still worried that I might decide to sell or change the terms of their lease. "I've been thinking about what happens to this house in the long term," I said. "You're both in your 70s now. You've lived here for 30 years. It's your home, even if it's not legally yours." "Nix," my father said. "We understand that you own the house. We're grateful for the arrangement we have." "I know," I said, "but I think we can do better." I pulled out a folder of documents, a familiar gesture that had become my signature move for family financial discussions. "I want to offer you a rent-to-own agreement," I said. "You can continue paying the same monthly amount, but a portion of each payment will go toward building equity in the house. After 10 years, you'll own it outright." My mother started crying. "But why?" she asked. "You could sell this house for twice what you paid for it. You can make a huge profit." "I don't need the money," I said, "and I don't need the house. But you need stability and you need to feel like you have a permanent home. This gives you both. What's the catch?" My father asked, still suspicious after years of being the spare daughter's parent. "No catch," I said. "Just a family taking care of each other." "But what if we can't make the payments?" My mother asked. "Then we'll figure out a solution," I said. "That's what families do." Marina spoke up from across the room. "This is what you've always done," she said. "You've always taken care of us, even when we didn't deserve it, even when we didn't appreciate it." "I'm not a saint," I said. "I'm just someone who learned that taking care of people you love is more important than being right or being acknowledged." "You learned that because you were the spare daughter," my father said quietly. "I learned that despite being the spare daughter," I corrected. "I learned it because I chose to be better than the labels people put on me." "Are we better now?" my mother asked. "Are we better than we were?" I looked around the room at my family, Marina, who'd learned to see me as an equal rather than a little sister, my parents, who'd learned to see me as successful rather than struggling, my niece and nephew, who'd grown up seeing me as the aunt who solved problems and made things happen, Jules, who'd chosen to build a life with me based on who I was, not what I'd achieved. We're real now, I said. We see each other clearly. We take care of each other. We don't pretend anymore. And you're not the spare daughter anymore, my mother said. I was never the spare daughter, I said. I was always essential. You just needed to learn how to see it. That night, as Jules and I walked back up around our neighborhood, she asked me a question that had been on my mind for months. Do you ever regret it? She asked. The way you handled things with your family? Some people might say you were too harsh, buying their house and making them tenants. I thought about it as we walked past houses full of families, past lives being lived in all their messy complexity. I regret that it was necessary, I said. I regret that I had to become their landlord to earn their respect. I regret that they couldn't see my worth without a dramatic demonstration. But you don't regret doing it. No, I said. I don't regret doing what I needed to do to change the dynamic. I don't regret forcing them to see me as I really am. I don't regret saving their home or giving them stability, even though it was manipulative. It was strategic. I corrected. There is a difference. Manipulation is about control and harm. Strategy is about solving problems and creating better outcomes. And did you create better outcomes? I looked back toward the house where my parents lived, the house I'd bought, the house they were now earning ownership of, the house that had become a symbol of our complicated but genuine love for each other. Yes, I said. I created better outcomes for everyone, including yourself. Especially myself, I said. I stopped being the spare daughter and started being just their daughter. I stopped trying to prove my worth and started living like I was already worthwhile. And now? Now I'm happy, I said, realizing it was true. I'm successful and respected and financially secure, but more than that, I'm happy. I have work that fulfills me, relationships that sustain me, and a family that sees me clearly. What would you tell someone else who's dealing with being underestimated by their family? She asked. I thought about all the people who'd reached out to me after reading articles about my story, all the people who'd shared their own experiences of being overlooked or dismissed by the people who were supposed to love them unconditionally. I'd tell them that sometimes you have to stop trying to change people's minds and start changing the circumstances that allow them to underestimate you. I said, I'd tell them that respect isn't given, it's earned, and sometimes you have to earn it by demonstrating power rather than asking for recognition. And if that doesn't work, then you build a life that doesn't depend on their approval. I said, you surround yourself with people who see your worth, and you stop wasting energy on people who don't. But you didn't give up on your family? No, I said. I didn't give up on them, but I stopped accepting their version of me. I forced them to confront the reality of who I was and what I was capable of. And when they finally saw me clearly, they chose to love me properly. And if they hadn't, then I would have been sad, but I would have been fine, I said, because I know who I am now. I know what I'm worth. I know that I'm not spare. I'm not backup. I'm not a consolation prize. I'm essential just as I am. As we walked home, I reflected on the journey that had brought me here. From the spare daughter to the landlord to the family member who was finally seen and valued for who she really was. It had been a long, complicated path, but it had led to a life I was proud of and a family I genuinely loved. The spare daughter had become the cornerstone of her family, not through desperate attempts to prove herself, but through quiet demonstrations of competence, love, and strength. She'd learned that sometimes the greatest revenge isn't destroying your enemies. It's becoming so essential to their lives that they can't imagine existing without you. And sometimes, if you're very lucky, the people who underestimated you will realize their mistake and choose to love you the way you've always deserved to be loved. 5 years after I bought my parents' house, I was invited to speak at a conference about family wealth and financial planning. The organizers wanted me to talk about innovative approaches to intergenerational wealth transfer. I stood on the stage, looking out at an audience of financial advisors, attorneys, and wealthy families, and I decided to tell them the truth. I want to talk to you about the spare daughter, I said, the child who's seen as the backup plan, the insurance policy, the one who will always be there but never be valued. I want to talk about what happens when the spare daughter stops accepting that role. I told them about growing up invisible, about being dismissed and overlooked, about watching my parents struggle financially while assuming I couldn't help. I told them about buying their house, about becoming their landlord, about forcing a recognition that changed everything. The traditional approach to family wealth is based on hierarchy, I said. Parents control the resources, and children compete for approval and inheritance. But what if we approached it differently? What if we treated all family members as valuable contributors, regardless of their age or their place in the birth order? I had talked about the importance of seeing all children as essential, not just the ones who fit certain expectations. I talked about the damage that favoritism can do, and the opportunities that are lost when families don't recognize the full range of talents and capabilities of their members. Every family has a spare daughter, I said. Someone who's underestimated, overlooked, or dismissed. And every family is poor for not recognizing that person's worth. Not just financially poor, but emotionally, intellectually, and spiritually poorer. After my talk, a woman approached me. She was probably in her 50s, well-dressed, and had tears in her eyes. "I'm the spare daughter in my family," she said. "I've been successful in my own right, but they still see me as the backup plan. They still make decisions without consulting me. They still assume I can't contribute anything meaningful. What are you going to do about it?" I asked. "I don't know," she said. "I don't have your resources. I can't buy their house or force them to respect me. You don't need my resources," I said. "You need my strategy. You need to stop accepting their version of you and start demonstrating your actual value. You need to stop asking for respect and start commanding it." "How?" "By being essential," I said. "By solving problems they can't solve. By contributing in ways they can't ignore. By being so valuable that they can't afford to underestimate you. And if they still don't see it, then you build a life that doesn't depend on their approval." I said, "You surround yourself with people who see your worth, and you stop wasting energy on people who don't." She nodded, wiping her eyes. "Thank you," she said, "for showing me it's possible." "It's not just possible," I said. "It's necessary." The world needs more people who refuse to accept being underestimated. The world needs more people who insist on being seen for who they really are. As I flew home that night, I thought about all the spare daughters and spare sons out there, all the people who'd been told they were backup plans and consolation prizes. I thought about the potential that was being wasted, the contributions that were being overlooked, the love that was being withheld. I thought about the family I built not just through blood and DNA, but through choice and effort and mutual respect. I thought about Marina, who'd learned to see me as an equal. I thought about my parents, who'd learned to value my contributions. I thought about Jules, who'd chosen to build a life with me based on who I was, not what I'd achieved. I thought about the spare daughter who'd become the cornerstone of her family, not through desperate attempts to prove herself, but through quiet demonstrations of competence, love, and strength. And I thought about the revenge that wasn't really revenge at all. It was justice. It was the natural consequence of underestimating someone who was never spare to begin with. The spare daughter had become the landlord, and in doing so, had taught her family what she'd always known: that love isn't about hierarchy or favoritism or conditional approval. It's about seeing people clearly and choosing to value them for who they really are. Sometimes the greatest revenge is simply insisting on being seen. Sometimes the most powerful thing you can do is refuse to accept being invisible. And sometimes, if you're very lucky, the people who underestimated you will realize their mistake and choose to love you the way you've always deserved to be loved. My name is Nix. I am 37 years old, and I live in Portland, Oregon. I am not the spare daughter. I never was. I am essential just as I am. And that's a story worth telling. Have you ever been betrayed by the people closest to you? Share your story in the comments. Someone out there needs to hear it. Remember, you're not spare, you're not backup, you're not a consolation prize. You're essential just as you are. And if the people in your life can't see that, it's time to find people who can Don't forget to hit that subscribe button and ring the notification bell for more stories from Revenge Treats. Sometimes the sweetest revenge is simply refusing to accept being underestimated.